Okay. Paul, can you hear me? Let's see if this audio works. Can anyone hear me now? Hello? Hello? Can anyone hear me now? Hello? Can anyone hear me now? Okay, thank goodness. What a bummer. I feel so bad. All these people had walked in and, well, I sent an email out, so hopefully people see it. Hey guys. How's everyone doing? While I wait for a minute for other people to join in, I wanted to talk about a few things, kind of go across the spectrum since, uh, I don't know, it's December. Like most people aren't really doing a ton of beekeeping and it's pretty cold out here. It's melting, but um, not in most of the world. It's not that bad. So I was really curious if anyone has a good beekeeping suit that they want to share with me. Please put it in the comments because I need to buy a new one very, very badly. I actually have never bought a bee suit. 12 years. I've never bought a suit. I have bought a crazy amount of veils and jackets with veils for my beekeeping classes. And I usually just wear a veil and like a long sleeve shirt and pants. Um, but I do wear the suit sometimes. And I really love having a suit with a hive tool pocket, like the really long pocket, because otherwise, even those pretty deep pockets in regular bee suits aren't enough. Um, you need like a hive tool pocket. And then also some suits, they're just made so poorly that the skirt, the veil part, the mesh, rips. Like, anyone else bought one of these bee suits on Amazon for $20 or the jacket? It looks like this. It doesn't even have like you have to wear a hat under it because it's really really thin. I bought a bunch of them for like my first beekeeping class or something, and this happened. And this the mesh of the veil is just so flimsy and thin on some of these like suits and jackets, and so I'd like to avoid that. And yeah, I get really hot. Elaine says I get hot in the full suit. That's why in 12 years I never bought one. I worked for one farm. I was an internship, a non-paid internship, and they bought a bee suit when I started because I was going to be there for 6 months, and I've been wearing that suit ever since because I usually don't wear a full suit because it's so hot out. I will wear a full suit if maybe harvesting honey, and definitely if I'm moving bees, I wear a full suit. Um, so thanks, guys, for all of the suggestions. Uh, but yeah, usually I just wear a veil, and I actually even bought a veil at Man Lake, and it was the plastic helmet with the veil on top, and the strap on the helmet snapped while on my head, like the second time I wore it. So I returned it, and then went to Dayton and got the same veil that I'd always used from them, and that one's still doing okay. That needs to be replaced too. Um, the farm I worked for, if they definitely gave you a look if you wore a full bee suit because they wear a t-shirt and pants and the veil, and they wear short gloves, like ones that like just barely cover their wrist, and that's like their thing, and they don't suit up. Uh, but I don't really care if people give me funny looks. Sometimes I just want to wear a bee suit. Uh, but yeah, I definitely want a hive tool pocket. That is a must because I lose my hive tools all the time, even with the pocket. And most of my bees are in yards with really tall grass. None of them are on my property. It's not my house. And so there's only so much I do to keep the grass down, which is actually usually just stepping on the grass in front of the hives. So when you drop a hive tool, it's like sometimes I spray paint them. to help me find them. But I don't. I would just really like to get a nicer bee suit. So, all right. Well, thanks guys for the suggestions. I'll have to check those out. I got actually an email from a company that makes bee suits, and they asked if they could put a blog post with a link to their website on my website in my blog, and I said sure, if I can put a blog with a link to my website on your blog so that it's an even exchange. And I also told them I was in the market to get a new suit if they wanted to send me one, and I would be happy to promote it if I liked it on my YouTube channel. And I never heard back from them. Most people, they just want to email you asking you to do stuff for them, but then they never want to do anything exchange, which seems silly. I mean, like, why can't we all just help each other out? Anyway, okay, so the second thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of a funny topic, I guess, but something that is a little bit was on my mind recently, was just beekeepers that have really like just changed my life. And I guess to get that dramatic is really just because I quit my job as a graphic designer and I moved to Hawaii for just 6 months, but ended up staying here. It's been 10 and a half years now. So beekeeping did change my life like quite a bit. And I was going to give up because my first couple of years went really poorly, but I didn't. And so I wanted to talk about some of those beekeepers that really just changed things totally for me and what encouraged me to keep going. You know, not directly. I didn't like know them or talk to them. Well, some of them later on, but the first one was his name is Don Shump, and he is a beekeeper in Philadelphia, and he has no idea who I am. But like 15 years ago, 14 years ago, he did this little beekeeping intro class. I don't know if it was free or like $5, and it was at the community center, and he just like did an introduction to beekeeping. I learned absolutely nothing about beekeeping or the beehive. He didn't even have a beehive there, but he did like just I guess put himself out there to help people that were curious about the hobby. And he told me where to go to buy bees, which was huge because then I was able to find this farm outside of Philly that went down to Georgia, bought a bunch of bees, maybe it was Tennessee, and drove up to Philly. And, you know, that's how you buy bees. You don't usually buy a package or a nuke from a farm down the road uh, that's raising the bees. You're usually buying them from a climate somewhere that's like a one or two climate zones warmer than you because those bees are ready and those queens have already been raised and they're new and young and then they bring them up to the cooler states. So for you guys, the reason why I wanted to talk about him was because for you guys have been keeping bees for a few years. Some people have a little bit of that imposter syndrome. You know, some people want to put up a YouTube channel and talk about beekeeping and show you what to do like their first year. But other people, I think they've been beekeeping for a few years and they maybe have this like feeling that they don't know enough to teach people. But I really think that it would be so helpful to a lot of beginner beekeepers if there were more beekeepers that were even in their second, third, fourth year that were out there like willing to talk to other beekeepers, willing to let you shadow them, or just doing like a really cheap class at a local center to just like expose people to beekeeping so that they understand what's involved and meet another beekeeper and can ask a bunch of questions. I have a intro class that's like $20 online, but I really think that it's helpful to like meet someone in person. Um, I did see someone had a question. Elaine says, I have a question. I requeened about 5 weeks ago. The inspection I made 2 weeks later looked good. Then I looked again a week ago, and the brood is really sketchy in the brood box and no sign of eggs. Yes, she was mated. Okay, so you bought the queen. Sorry, I'm getting over a cold. I've been sick for the last week. Um, no sign of eggs. Well, if you haven't yet, go to the my blog post, the YouTube video about what to do with your queen cells, because that will help you like answer, ask you a lot of questions and help direct you to what to do. But there's a little bit of math that's involved. I mean, if you put a new queen in a hive and you inspected it 2 weeks later, when you inspected it, was she already released and she was walking around and you saw eggs in the hive, or 2 weeks later, like you saw her? Um, uh, because I mean, there's a lot of trouble that people have when requeening and putting a new queen in, if they're just putting her in with a cage, and making sure that there were absolutely no queen cells. Because okay, so the queen was released and she was walking around um, 2 weeks after putting her in, and then now you looked a week ago, so I guess 4 weeks after putting her in, the brood is not looking good and there's no sign of eggs. Well, one, that is odd, because usually if the hive accepts the queen, then everything should be okay. One other question I have is like, what's going on with bees right now in your area? Like, is it still warm? Should you be doing a lot? Are the your other hives like active? Are they bringing in lots of honey? Um, because that's very strange for the queen to be added to the hive to see eggs and then for her to not have eggs. I mean, really, all you want to do is just be a little bit patient with her. There's only, I personally will only requeen a hive once before, if they don't do well after that, then the population gets to be the point that you don't, I don't like to put another queen in. I will then merge it with another hive. Okay, so if you only have one hive, it's warm out. There could be other things going on in the environment that just like, they're not bringing in a lot of food, or if it's hot out, they might be busy cooling down the hive. And when the hive activity goes down and they're not bringing in as much food, the amount of laying the queen will do will decrease. So, I mean, one, it's possible that you got a bad queen. Unfortunately, um, not every queen is viable. There's a lot of things that can happen when she is, as before she hatches, that could make her not as strong or viable, or she might not have mated well. So if you only have one hive, then there's one of two things you can do. You can just wait it out and give her a chance, or you have to be ready to put in another queen if you're sure that there isn't one, before the population gets to be the point that there's not enough bees to sustain this queen. So there's like this clock, this time clock, when your hive doesn't have a queen, that the population is going down every single day and there's no queen laying eggs. um, so it's really up to you what you want to do. You can wait it out and see what happens in another week or two and give her a chance, or you can wait max one more week. If you don't see any eggs within the entire hive, then put in another queen. um, with only one hive, it's really tricky to tell what's going on in your area. If it's really hot out, your bees could just be, dealing with the heat, and the hive activity is going down while they are trying to just keep it cool. But check out the queen cell chart, because that will help you go through the steps, ask you some questions, then you can go to your hive, inspect it, and then figure out what direction to go in. Yeah, BJD says, was the queen guaranteed? Because you can contact the farm and say that you successfully released the queen, but she's not doing anything, and they might reimburse you or give you another one, hopefully. And then Michael Schaefer says, I live in Central Texas. I have a 8-frame hive that's queenless, and I have a swarm I caught 2 months ago in a nuke. Is it okay to combine them when the temperatures are in the 50s and 60s? 50s and 60s in the daytime is not an ideal to be messing with the brood. Um, but I mean, the queenless hive is going to die. So either way, you have to do something for them, or they're just going to die fairly quickly. And the swarm you caught 2 months ago, I mean, it is okay to successfully overwinter a nuke. If you think that you're going to get temperatures a little bit more in like 65 to high 60s and sunny, then that's when you want to combine those bees. It is also possible uh, to, I mean, it depends on how you want to combine the bees. You can do the newspaper way if you want, but if you think it's going to be getting colder out in the next week or so and you're not going to be able to combine them and prepare them for winter, then you can either just combine them and see how they do, and if the bees accept the combine on their own, because not always will bees not do well when you combine them. They don't always go and just attack the queen, or it just do all that you can for the swarm that you caught and hope that they survive the winter, and just leave that hive that's queenless be, or see if you can buy a queen, and that would also be an option. This is a really tricky time to deal with a queenless hive. I mean, there's a very small chance that they are going, whatever you do, they are going to survive this time of year. It's really up to you whether you want to potentially harm both hives in the process to combine these bees, or just put all of your eggs in that one basket for that swarm that you caught. Elaine says she was lucky to get one queen. Um, that is a bummer. If it's not too hard to get another package of bees or a nuke, then you might just want to wait it out and see what they do. Um, and this is a tricky one. You guys have some hard questions. Is when it comes to this, it's a lot easier when you can just see the bees and you can see how strong they are and what a frame looks like and how many bees are on this frame. When a hive has no queen, usually their buzzing is kind of quiet, and without that queen releasing their pheromone, they're not as active, and there's just a little bit of a different feeling to them than when they have a queen. So if you're new to this, you might not be able to pick up on this so quickly, but just try to spend some time near the hive and see how active they are. And if there is a lot of activity because it's hot out, then I would just uh, hold off and wait and see if this queen will start laying. Are you seeing the queen and she's just not laying eggs? Like, is she still walking around? Or do you think like they killed her, or that you accidentally squished her? Like, is she totally missing? Or you see a queen and you're just not seeing eggs, because that'll maybe help you a little bit more. Stan Gore says, do queens slow down in December in Hawaii? They do, actually. I've actually even seen piles of dead drones outside the hive around November. It's cooler out. It's down in the 60s at nighttime, and it's nowhere near as hot. It's been raining the last few days, but right now it's hot. uh, there's not much blooming from October to January where I am. And actually, even the farm that moves their bees November to January is pretty slow for them as well. And then January, February is when the macnut trees start blooming and the silver oak. So Elaine says no eggs. Never seen queen yet. I'm still new at this. Okay, well I would just give her some time and hope for the best that she is in there and she's laying. You're just not seeing the eggs for now. Paul Kish says, "Are you feeding your bees sugar water in Hawaii?" No, I do. I don't feed my bees almost ever. Only if I think they really, really need it. There's enough wildflowers all year round that they don't need to be fed. Um, the farm that I worked for, they have their honey certified by an outside organic certification service. And so they are not allowed to feed their bees. And since I worked for them for like 7 years, I just really I almost forget it's an option to feed your bees because it's just not something that I've ever even really been exposed to much. And the pollen patties, the small hive beetle, I mean, the small hive beetle population is so high year round here, and the Varroa mite levels are really bad here without a frost. And the small hive beetles will lay their eggs at the pollen patties and just those larvae will be squirming around in a hive. So I don't use pollen patties whatsoever, not even like a teeny tiny little piece. And at this point, you just like get so many frames of pollen in a hive. Usually, when a hive is about to swarm, they start filling the brood section with pollen to get the queen to stop laying, and so she doesn't have any room to lay eggs. And so, once a hive starts to get really full of pollen, I just pull those frames out and store them in the freezer, and I'll just put that into hives as they need it. So, um, Elaine, I hope your queen is there and I hope she's doing well. Please let us know at the next live video what happened. Um, anyone else, if anyone else new has joined and you have a beekeeping suit that you really like or that you tried and was terrible, please let me know. I'm in the market to get a new suit. So the life-changing beekeepers, I got a little bit off topic. The first one was Don Shump, who is just a guy in Philly that did this low cost like intro to beekeeping class at a local rec center, and he was really helpful to just get I didn't know any beekeepers, but I wanted to get into beekeeping. And so he just, made it seem like it might be possible. And for you guys, I really hope that some of you think about doing something like that for your community because it is really hopeful for people to meet another local beekeeper as a in addition to the bee club meetings, because sometimes the bee clubs, all these associations, there's so many people and everybody wants things done a very specific way. And you have the people that have been running it for 10, 15 years. And then the new people get a little intimidated or feel like their voice isn't being heard. And there's nothing wrong with just like offering information for people that want it. If you do it and you charge for it, which you should charge at least like $5 or $10 if it's for a couple hours, $20 maybe. When I did my first beekeeping class, I put flyers up everywhere. And I thought people were going to see this bee class because everyone was asking me to put up a beekeeping class because there wasn't anything around. I put this flyer up and nobody signed up, like maybe 2 people. And and those were the people that were already coming to the association meetings that had already asked me to put up the um, the class. And what I did was I went to Facebook and I made an advertisement and I targeted anybody, men, women, no matter your age, that was within a 50-mile radius of the town I lived in. And the class sold out in 24 hours. And I had a waiting list. And whenever I needed people to sign up for a class, I would put out another ad. And it worked like a charm. It cost me like no more than $10 and it worked really well. So don't be intimidated by those Facebook ads. They work really well and they're actually pretty easy to do. You don't have to fill out all of those questions that they ask you. You just fill out the important ones. On a side note, Donald Trump was recently in the Philadelphia news because he left his shop vac in the back of his truck and it was stolen, and the shop vac was full of wasps. So, I thought that was pretty funny. That's just like a beekeeper's dream, that if someone was to steal your stuff, that a whole bunch of wasps might potentially sting you. I mean, does it get any better than that? All right, so the second person was this guy. His name is Bill Turnbull, and he wrote a book called Confessions of a Bad Beekeeper. I read this after my either first or second year, when I had lost my first couple hives, and I wasn't sure if I should still keep bees, and things weren't going well. And it was the first time I had read something where the guy just pretty much talked about every stupid thing he did as a beekeeper. Like, he bought fish, and the smell of fish, like, I don't remember the story, but that got the bees mad, and they were stinging him, and it was just like one silly thing after the next. And I think he's a journalist or a writer, and so his writing style is good. But when I was first getting started, I remember people at the bee club meetings. They were in their first year, and they knew like nothing about bees, and their hives were doing so well, and they were living out, in the more rural areas, and there was a lot more food for the bees. And then I read like almost every book I could find in the Philadelphia library system, and still my hives were not doing well. And it made me feel like it wasn't enough to just read and research and watch videos, but there was like some magic thing that I needed to be a good beekeeper that I didn't have. And so then reading that book was like the start of hearing of those bad stories, and that it's okay to be bad. And that's one reason why I like to talk about how bad I was as a beekeeper when I was getting started. Um, Bushcraft with the Preacher says the local honey farm named AJ Honey is very pro veteran and want to teach anyone that's interested, but they are the ones responsible for me getting into beekeeping. Very grateful combat veteran. Um, yeah, and I hope that like one day you consider teaching people too, and it's especially really helpful for people that have PTSD. And that one nonprofit that I donated my class to, they do a combination of helping veterans with PTSD, not only on beekeeping, but also other meditation practices, because beekeeping is very meditative, whether you meditate or not. I have, go through phases where I do, but most of the time I don't. And there's a lot of similarities between beekeeping and meditating. Um, and then the other two beekeepers are pretty big names, but probably big names in beekeeping for a good reason. And one of them is Michael Bush. And Michael Bush is really why I became a beekeeper, because when I was reading the books about beekeeping, and there wasn't really a local class, and I was getting really overwhelmed by like all of the stuff to learn, and it seemed really complicated and there are just so many steps. And then Michael Bush actually explained it in a way that he very much simplifies the process. And he has a book called, I think it's called Natural Beekeeping. He also has a website, if you just look up Bush Farms. And he has all the information from his books right there on the website. And he really is just like, he doesn't see the point to having to feeding all the time. He says feeding is when it's necessary. It's not something you have to do. And all of these things that people do aren't really things that you have to do. And whenever I interviewed him for my podcast, and he said, whenever somebody says, how do I get my bees to blah blah blah, he says, well, that's like the first problem, is that you're not trying to convince your bees to do stuff. You are their helper. You look at the hive and you try to figure out what they're trying to do, and you see, how can I help my bees do what they're trying to do, which is huge, because that's a big part of beekeeping, is figuring out how to help your bees. It's not raising them. You're not their parent. You're not telling them what to do. They clean out their hive, they mate, they produce their own warmth, they produce their own babies, they take care of these babies, they gather water, they cool down the hive. I mean, they do like almost everything, and they can take care of themselves in theory. But as a beekeeper, you're helping them out. And one of the reasons why you're helping them out is because you've caused problems for them, because you've put them in this hive that is easy for you, but it's not necessarily the best for the bees. And so now that they're in this stack of boxes and they're near all of these other beehives, and that's allowing for more robbing and bees to find each other and mites to be distributed. And now that we've brought mites all over the world, now there's a little bit more that the beekeeper does to help the bees. But a lot of the stuff that beekeepers talk about isn't really necessary. It's just things that people like to do. And I like that idea of beekeeping, is that you can buy the gadgets and you can figure out all these ways to do things for your bees. But when it comes down to it, a lot of that stuff doesn't need to be done, and a lot of this can be simplified quite a bit. And then the final beekeeper that really changed a lot for me was Randy Oliver from scientificbeekeeping.com. And he is the complete opposite in many ways of Michael Bush, um, but in a really great way, because I didn't learn how to deal with Varroa mites while working at the farms. They put in treatments when I wasn't there at the larger apiary, and the smaller apiary, they just like sometimes treated once in a while. They were very new, the Varroa mite, to Hawaii when I came here. And then I found Randy Oliver's website, and he is a biologist. And he then said, okay, well, we have these mites and they're causing colonies to collapse. So, like, what do we do about it? Let's take a treatment, let's treat a bunch of hives, and let's see the results. And I really like how he breaks down the practice of dealing with mites in a way that makes sense. So he has like this 3-level process. He says, like, one, test a hive to see if they have high mite levels. Do a test and see what your levels are. Step 2, if your mite levels are high, or at whatever level they need to be treated at, you put in a treatment. The next step, you test again to see if the treatment worked. And then the third part is to continue to breed bees that deal with mites better than the other hives in your apiary. And people will say all kinds of things like, is powdered sugar better than the alcohol in a mite test, and this treatment versus that treatment. And he just tests it. He just says, well, I tested a bunch of hives with the alcohol wash, and then I tested them again with the powdered sugar, and these are the results. And so you'll see that the mite levels are higher when you test it with alcohol. And he just like uses numbers and charts and facts to solve problems. So if you've never seen his website, then you should definitely check out scientificbeekeeping.com. Okay. Any other questions before I move on to the next topic? Yikes, 2:15. My daughter should be waking up anywhere from 20 to 45 minutes from now. One person says the temperatures have been really crazy in Colorado. We moved to the 30s to the teens, and now lows of 20s to high 30s. Put on a Be Cozy covers, and now we're going to maybe the 60s. Yikes. Well, it sounds like a Be Cozy is pretty good idea. I would keep the Be Cozy on. Just make sure that they still have a lower entrance, that you're not blocking the lower entrance. I'm not familiar with like what the top of the Be Cozy is, but it's really good to have an upper entrance as well. And just make sure you're going out there and scooping out those dead bees. That's kind of winter in Pennsylvania. It doesn't snow much, and that's usually because it'll go down into the teens and the 20s for a little bit, and then it'll be like pretty sunny, and then we'll have temperatures in the 40s and 50s, and it'll be rainy. And that's kind of what it's like off and on. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with having insulation like that. You just want to make sure you have ventilation so that, like, the upper entrance, it's important because then warm air can chimney up and out. And then the lower entrance is important so that the bees can come and go as well. I mean, and the upper entrance is a backup so that the bees can come and go from there if the lower one is being blocked by snow or a lot of dead bees. So I mean, definitely keep the bee cozy on. It's not gonna like make the hive too warm when it's in the 60s. If it got to be in the 70s, then yeah, maybe take it off, put it back on when it cools down again. But when the temperature goes up and down like that a lot, what the problem we had in Pennsylvania was that they eat through a lot of their food reserves. So if it starts to get warm for when it's like down in the 20s, they're in such a tight cluster, they're not really eating a lot of their food. But when it goes up and down and then it warms up into the 60s and bees are leaving the hive and they're using energy, and then they're going to be eating up a lot of their food storage. So if you have a lot of that going on throughout the winter, then you might want to check on the hive more often to make sure they have enough food. And to start, I mean, just like push it a little bit to just get a feel for the weight of the hive. And then as the season goes on, once it starts to feel lighter and lighter on one of those warm days, you're going to want to take that lid off and just peek down and not touch the brood or any of the frames or anything, but make sure there's enough food under that lid. Just make sure that the bee cozy isn't blocking an upper entrance. It's good to have an upper entrance. Owen Fleming says that there are a number of studies now showing that ventilation is not good for overwintering in cold climates. I mean, I haven't done any studies. So if you can find any links to them, then please put them in the comments so I can check them out. I've always been taught to have an upper entrance as that backup in case the lower entrance gets blocked, and also so that the hot air can come out. I mean, I know beekeepers that are keeping bees in Maine and Massachusetts, and I mean, maybe in like Canada and Alaska, that might be too much. But I would think it's more important to have insulation around the hive, but also have that upper entrance. Because I was under the impression that the cluster stays warm. They're not heating up the entire beehive. So they're clustering up, kind of like emperor penguins. They're not inside a cave clustering up and heating up the cave. They're just outside in the elements, and they're producing heat and then moving so that the ones in the center, when they get really warm, go to the outside, and the ones on the outside move to the center, and that's how they stay warm. But maybe in like there are more extreme climates that might be more beneficial. I mean, obviously, I'm not in an extreme cold climate. Pennsylvania. I mean, I was in eastern Pennsylvania, near the coast, so not on the water. Obviously, it's not. It doesn't touch the ocean. But in Philadelphia, it's doesn't get below the teens, really almost ever. If anyone does have bees in cold climates and their bees do well with or without an upper entrance, let me know. Put them in the comments so that we can see. BJD says top bar hives don't have an upper entrance. I could not overwinter my hives with the top bars. I had a lot of difficulty with it. I know it can be done, and I know people do it, but that was something that I struggled with the top bars. Okay. So Just wanted to talk about for the beginners out there that are maybe don't have bees yet or in their first year. Wanted to talk about one of those intro topics that I'm going to be filming a new video for, which is just reading your frame of bees. And this is definitely something that is easier when you're out at the beehive and you can show people. But I wanted to just um, congratulations. BJD says that he successfully overwintered 2 top bar hives last year. Great. um, if you have the time, I would love it if you emailed me, your tips for overwintering top bar hives so that I can share them. I don't talk much about top bar hives in my beekeeping class, but it's always good to have that information from people that had good experience with it so that I can share that with some people that have top bar hives. Okay. So when you're opening up a beehive and you're inspecting it, you're really just checking on them to make sure there's nothing you need to do. And when you're pulling your frames out, the hive is essentially empty. It's an empty box, and then we have frames or bars that the bees are building their comb on. And this comb is really the foundation of the beehive. The honeycomb is, what the bees walk on, and it is where they sleep. In theory, they say bees sleep. I think some people argue about that, but I have seen bees with their whole body in a cell with just their butt point sticking out and not moving. And then I will poke them. Has anyone else like tapped them on the butt? And then they just like the seconds go by and then they like wiggle and then they come out. So that's what I'm assuming they're doing. And I have read that bees do sleep. So when they're on this honeycomb, they are DCB says that a big factor on upper entrances is venting and can depend on moisture and temperature. I mean, I don't see how that could be a problem no matter the temperature, but it is very possible if it's, like extremely cold and getting below 0 degrees Fahrenheit. And I would think that it would help a lot with moisture control so that you don't have so much condensation building up under the lid. You should have something to absorb the moisture anyway, but that is another big reason for the upper entrance is for that prevention of the moisture building up. So when you're opening up your hive, you're pulling out frames and you're looking at frames that either are empty or have honeycomb on them. And the empty frames are ones that are just either totally nothing or just your foundation. And your honeycomb is everything for your bees. Honeycomb can vary in color from being white to yellow to dark brown. Once my honeycomb gets to be dark brown, I actually get rid of it and I will put in a new frame for them to build into. Kodiak Farm Beasley says bees will go into a how do you pronounce that word? Torpor state. Interesting. I have read that a lot of animals don't really sleep the way humans do. They don't, go into this like deep sleep like us, but they do rest. Has anyone ever seen a drone sleeping on a flower? I swear I saw a drone once asleep on a flower. And DC Speed says in the Northwest, we don't get very cold, but we do get a lot of rain. So I use top venting to help with condensation. The condensation and the humidity is a pretty big problem that I had. I've seen bumblebees sleeping on flowers in the morning. I suppose that if a bee is out too late and can't go back to the hive, they just sleep on the flower until the sun comes up because they use the sun to orientate themselves and find their way back to the hive. So that does make sense that they would just have to nap where they are if it's dark out. So a honeycomb is really where the bees are doing everything. They will communicate on this honeycomb, and bees will do waggle dances. Bees will pass off nectar on the honeycomb. They will go up to the queen, and the queen isn't really fuzzy, and that's because they rub her ball. They're constantly walking over to her, touching her with their antenna, picking up her pheromone, and then walking around the hive. And then that's how they distribute her pheromone all over the hive. And then the drones, they have been known to feed themselves, but they will also sometimes go up to a worker bee and pester her until she feeds them. Or, of course, when there's no more food coming in, and then they kick them out and let them die. So inside these cells is also like everything. That's their storage. That's where they put their food, and that's where the baby bees are, and that's where the bees are resting. For food, you have two different kinds of food. You have bee bread and you have the nectar honey. Bee bread is pollen mixed with nectar. It's kind of shiny a little bit, looks a little slimy. If you're ever concerned about small hive beetle slime, you might sometimes see bee bread and think that it's looking a little slimy, but it's really just the shine from the nectar mixed with the pollen. And that they bring in small amounts for the larva. And then you have the food, the honey, which is at first nectar, and then once it is capped, then it looks like, then it turns in, then it's honey. So it can be hard to differentiate between, what is a drone versus a worker bee cell before it hatches, or what is honey versus a pupating bee, because they both have a capping over them and you can't see inside them. And I do have an identification guide for you to download in a PDF. And if you check out almost any YouTube video, it's in the description. And in there, I have just pictures of capped brood versus capped honey and things of that sort, so that you can see what the two look like next to each other. But capped honey is kind of bumpy, and the whole thing just is uneven. Whereas pupating bees, it has a capping over it, but you can see the little hexagon imprint of every single cell. And drone comb and worker bee comb, they look very similar as well, but the drone comb is a little bit bigger. And if you're ever holding it next to the worker bees, you'll see the difference in size. But for most of you, if you're using foundation, you're not going to have any drone cells unless you get drone cell foundation and put that into your hive. That's usually green and is something that you're going to have to buy in addition to the rest of your beekeeping stuff. And that's pretty much what you're doing when you're reading the frame, is going through an inspection sheet and looking at how much honey and how much brood you have. And people ask, like, when should I harvest honey? The question is within your inspection sheets, because every inspection, if you say, write down how much frames of honey you have. If I have like half a frame, I'll put like a half a tick mark. And you see, like, throughout June, July, there was like an extra frame of honey every week, every couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden it stops, or you have less honey. Then that tells you that the bloom season has ended and now is time to harvest. Assuming that the weather is also cooling down and stuff, and you don't think that there's another bloom season that's going to be starting. And when it comes to splitting hives, when it comes to figuring out what hives to split, what hives deal with Varroa mites, all that stuff is within your inspection sheet. If you just look to see what hives have the most amount of frames of brood, what hives have the most honey, what hives have like a high activity. And those are the bees that are the ones that you want to split and breed from. And we'll tell you like where can you go to get frames if you want to make splits, because you always want to leave at least 4 frames of brood in every single hive. And when you make a split, you should put at least 4 frames of brood in the hive. And if the hive only has 6 frames of brood on your inspection sheet, that's not a hive you're going to be able to split from. You can take a couple of frames from there and a couple of frames from other hives, but you're not going to be able to just take 4 frames from there and leave them with 2 frames of brood left. Jeff Perry says, Brian says, have you ever tried Russian bees? We don't have Russian bees here, actually. It's just German, Italian, and Carnelian, as far as I'm aware. I read that they deal with Varroa mites better. I thought that was Eva Crane that made that guess and worked to bring them over, because they what is it called? They kind of evolved with the Varroa mite, and so in theory should be able to deal with the mite better. But a lot of the world's crane breeders are here, but we're very limited in our genetics. And without artificially inseminating your bees, I just don't see how you can really say that you have a Russian queen when you don't really know like the males she's mating with. I'm curious if there are people that are artificially inseminating their queens and selling them on the mainland or from Hawaii. Jeff Perry says, I feed from the top. I use outdoor temp humidity sensor that I read from the house. When the temperature drops 32 degrees or lower with burlap, I notice a humidity drop in the hive. Burlap soaks the moisture. Interesting. Those temperature humidity sensors are really interesting. Jeff, I'm curious, where is the sensor in the hive? Is it like near the brood, or do you have it like up under the lid? Because I'm curious, like it would be interesting to have 2 sensors in a hive so you could see if the temperature is that much different, like throughout the hive. Are the bees just heating themselves up quite a bit and the rest of the hive is pretty cold? I mean, even with insulation, the hive is still going to be really drafty. There's still a lower entrance. No matter your upper entrance or not, you still have like a hole in the hive for the bees to come and go. I'm curious, so what the temperature differences in the hive. And then also, how cold does it get inside the hive? So if it's like 32 degrees outside, what is the temperature inside the hive? He has 1 sensor on a frame and another above in the feeder. Interesting. I'll have to get one of those when I move back to the East Coast. Emmanuel says, what are the best options to winter bees in the north? We have negative 20 degrees Celsius to negative 35 in winters. Lost all colonies on my first wintering. Yikes. That's really cold. I do not specialize in like very extreme cold winters. You're really going to have to talk to people in your area about what to do. Though I'm not so good on my Celsius to Fahrenheit conversions. Let's see. Negative 35. Yikes. That's really cold, Emmanuel. If anyone lives in a climate that is that cold, that goes down to negative 35 in the winters, please leave it in the comments. Maybe you can help them out. But I've only worked with beekeepers in Massachusetts and Maine about overwintering, but it doesn't get that cold. The beekeepers I met in Alaska, they had a house actually that they put their beehives in the winter, not like insulated or anything, but like I guess more so like a shed to help protect the bees from the snow and the wind. And I'm sure there was, like a door so they could get outside, but they had them like protected in a building. And they said that the other beekeepers that they knew in Alaska, just their bees died every single winter and they would buy new bees every single spring. So that is actually a common practice for beekeepers in cold weather states. I'm not suggesting that you do that. I would not have the heart to have my bees die every single winter and to get new ones in the spring. I don't think that would be really hard to witness every year, but that is something that a lot of beekeepers do in the really cold um, weather places. Um, Curious Koi says Broodmaster puts it above the brood if there's one sensor in the hive. But the brood is moving, so how do you? I mean, I guess you just have it like right below the food or something. I'm really curious about that. I have to try that out one year. Craig says, question, if drones don't do much for the hive and just fly off to fertilize the queen, is it important to have a green foundation frame or forego that for the additional drawer for worker cells and food? Thank you for a question that an easier one to answer. You guys are full of really tough questions. The wintering questions are hard for me because I'm a little bit out of practice with it. Um, yeah, you can. You don't have to get the green foundation frames for the drones. I don't use foundation, so my bees build a lot of drone comb. And if I was to be in the business of selling honey, and I mean, I do sell honey, but if I was trying to sell as much honey as possible, then definitely I wouldn't be letting my bees build their own comb, and I wouldn't be putting green foundation frames in my hive. But uh, the green foundation, um, the bees build drones, they're more likely to have the Varroa mites go into those cells and lay their eggs because more than 95% of the Varroa mites in your hive are going to be feeding off of the pupating bees in your hive. So you're not seeing them. They're not on the live adult bees walking around the hive. They sneak in that cell of the really large larva right before they cap it. And then once that cell has been capped, the female varroa mite will feed off of that pupating bee and lay eggs, and those eggs will hatch and they will mate with each other and they'll lay eggs, and there's just like multiple generations of mites in the cell feeding off of this pupating bee. So they like the drone cells because they uh pupate longer. They take the longest before they hatch. And my husband had asked, do you think that they really know this when they're going into the cells, or do you think it's a happy accident? But I really think that they are looking for the biggest cell possible, the varroa mites, when they're looking for something to feed off of. As the bigger the cell, the longer it's going to take before it pupates. And one way to manage varroa mites naturally is to put drone comb in the hive, and once it's full, you freeze it. And so that's a way to decrease your mite population. Um, and then another thing some people do is they buy foundation for the worker bees that's actually even smaller cell size than the typical foundation that people use. And with that smaller cell size, then the mites have even less time to feed off of that pupating bee before it hatches. And that is a secondary way that people naturally help their bees deal with varroa mites without using treatments. Now, ideally, you want your bees to deal with mites on their own by opening these pupating bees and pulling out the affected ones and removing the mites on their own, or cleaning each other and removing the mites on their own. But if the hive is not doing this on their own and not lowering their mite levels on their own, then as the beekeeper, before you go putting in a treatment, things you can do to keep the mite levels low is use the smaller cell size foundation for your worker bees and putting in some drone comb and then freezing it once it's capped. And then also, if you don't like to do mite tests or you have trouble with the mite tests, another way you could see your hive's mite levels is by opening up like 10 or 20 cells of capped pupating bees of the drone comb and just counting the mites and seeing. That'll give you a good idea of your mite levels. Or it'll at least tell you when you have an infestation. You're seeing like 3 mites just like crawling around on this little larva. It's a sign that you have really high mite levels. The Kodiak Bee Farm says -20 to -35 Celsius is -4 to -31 Fahrenheit, which is really, really cold. Curious Koi says Broodminder software companies sensor temperature to ambient outside temperature. Interpretation of the data with observations of the hives gives info about hive health. Interesting. I'm curious, does it help you? Like, it's interesting to know this information and to see it. Is there anything that you can do with this information, knowing the difference in the temperature inside the hive versus what it is outside and the moisture levels? Is it like, I mean, once you have this information, is it just to learn for next year, or I'm curious what it can help, what it can help prevent for the beekeeper. So Owen says that if you're getting to temperatures that are -30 degrees Fahrenheit, you just need a lot of insulation and a lot of food. Well, maybe not just, but so what are you using for insulation, Owen? Uh, Other than like something like a bee cozy, what do you? What kind of wood do you use for your boxes? Are you like using a different kind of beehive, or is it just something that you're putting on the outside of the beehive? Um, and then Namchi Vu says hives are not warm enough compared to a tree. Keeping bees in the shed or insulation should work just fine. But yeah, I mean that is a really common thing with the beekeepers I met in Alaska is to put them in a shed. But yeah, I mean it's a lot of the problems that bees face are because us as beekeepers did it to them. If they were left to their own devices, they would be finding a better home. But since we put them in this hive that makes it easy for us, now we have to help them deal with winter. Um, and then Owen says that he can tell Emmanuel things he's done. Thank you, Owen, for connecting with Emmanuel. That would be great if you guys could work together. There's also the Bee Association in northern New York. Their temperatures aren't as cold as where you guys are, but the guy that runs that association has a really great Facebook page, really active. People are very nice and friendly. He's really nice, and he's really answered a lot of questions for people on that site. I think it's like the Upstate New York Bee Association or something along those lines. Bushcraft says, I haven't used it yet, but there's an app named Bee Scanning that will give you a fairly accurate Varroa mite count based on the picture you take with your phone. Interesting. I'll have to try that. I don't trust it, but I will definitely try it and see what happens. Let's see. What is it called? Bee Scanning. Yeah. Um, okay, my daughter is starting to wake up from her nap. Thanks everyone for all your comments and questions. If anyone has any other questions before I sign off, let me know. I'm putting out a video tomorrow about how to make beeswax candles in a container that are scented. So if you're curious about making candles, check out that video. It'll be going up tomorrow morning. Um, Depending on how interested people are in that topic, I could put out more videos about things I make with my beeswax. I I have a weird obsession with making things. I just like to constantly tinkering with stuff. So I was gonna make another video about beeswax soap and honey soap and beeswax chapstick and beeswax candles in molds. But I'm not gonna really get into all those things that aren't really beekeeping, unless there's something that people are interested in. Brian says, "Have you ever gave your bees?" Oh, he's talking to Nigella. Black seed oil mixed into syrup to feed bees. Uh, I have never heard of that. What would be the? I'll have to look that up. I've always just put honeybee healthy. I mean, you get one of those bottles, even the small ones, and then, well, I don't feed my bees often, so it lasts a really long time for me. And let's see. Okay, I don't think I've missed any other questions. If I missed your question, retype it. uh, because sometimes they get a little lost. Darren says he'd be curious about making candles. So thank you everyone for logging in. Uh, just a heads up, I am going to be probably changing my beekeeping class starting January, to a membership class. So if you already purchased the class and this doesn't pertain to you, it's not going to change anything for people that bought the class. But I'm going to offer the option that you can just pay by the month and access a different chapter every month. So if you're curious about it and don't want to pay the whole fee to see the entire class, then you can get, I think the first month is free, and then you pay for the next month, like $20 or something. Um, but that does limit you to how long you can ask questions. That being said, I don't like check to see whether people are paying me when they email me a question. If someone emails me a question, I just like answer them. Most of the time, I'm not like, well, uh, you have only submitted payment for this much money for this amount of times. But that's going to be a change to my course, and then my channel is going to be changing a lot, um, next year. I mean, not a ton. It's still going to be about beekeeping, but we're going to be leaving the state, next year. We're moving back to Pennsylvania, and so my channel. Well, first, I'm going to be selling all my bees, and then I'm going to be buying new bees. And probably actually getting rid of all my equipment and buying new equipment. So my channel is going to change. Next year, it'll still be beekeeping similar to this. And then after that, 2025, you're going to see me starting beekeeping from scratch. Uh, so it'll be pretty much what I would have done if I was to start beekeeping all over again, but knowing the things that I know after the 12 years of beekeeping. So it'll be interesting to see, and you'll see me dealing with cold weather again, which is very unfortunate, and daylight savings, and it being dark out at 5 p.m., and all those other weird things that you guys on the mainland deal with that I haven't experienced in over a decade. Brian says, buy Russian bees, you'll love them. All right, I'm still very skeptical of these Russian bees. I know in theory they sound great, but I'm skeptical that if someone says they're going to sell me a Russian bee, they're actually going to sell me a Russian bee. And I have a lot of experience with some of these bigger operations, and they are full of junk, a lot of them. They are not, just because someone's a beekeeper does not mean that they are um, a good person. Some of these beekeepers, they don't even like bees. They don't even know anything about bees. They just like do the task that they're told to do. And the bees are everywhere and they get squished. And I didn't have the heart to work for a lot of these places. They're quite mean to them. So I don't really believe a lot of these commercial apiaries when they say stuff. So I'm gonna have to find some more local places, and I'll believe them if they tell me they're gonna sell me a good Russian bee. And yeah, you beekeepers in Pennsylvania and Jersey, we'll have to meet up at a bee association meeting or something, because I'll be in your neck of the woods. So thanks for logging in, and I will see you in January. Happy holidays and have a good New Year. And don't stress out too much. Make sure that you enjoy it. Buy from the Real Russian Breeding Project members. Interesting. I will write that down. That sounds like some revolutionary um, organization or something. Maybe just because it has the word Russian in it. Can you tell I'm Ukrainian? I have a little bit of a bad taste for things that are Russian. All right. Bye, guys.